They say Brother Silas was a man of foundations. He knew how to build things that lasted, except for the home he left behind. He gave his sweat, his savings, and finally his life to build a house for God, only to have the man in the pulpit tell his widow she had 3 weeks to pack her bags. This is the story of how blind loyalty becomes a cage, and why even a man of faith must learn to look at the hands that are taken from him. It's good to be loyal, but don't be stupid. Welcome to the Afro Tales with Kemi, where African stories are told slowly, honestly, and with meaning. So sit back, open your heart, and walk with me through today's tale, told as always, the African way. I am Kemi Iwalesi. Before he became Brother Silas, he was simply Silas, a man drowning in the depths of green bottles. In his late 20s, life had handed him a drinking problem that swallowed his days and a carpentry business that went entirely belly up under the weight of debt. Night after night, he would sit in the dim corners of a local bar, staring blankly at unwashed glasses, while his young wife Ada waited up in a cold room. He was a man falling apart, and his hands meant for building were only used for lifting sorrow to his lips. Yet Ada had the grace to stay anyway, keeping watch over a shadow of a man. Then he found the church, or perhaps the church found him. The pastor had prayed for him, genuinely it seemed, with heat and specificity, calling things by their names. And right there at the altar, something deep inside shifted. Silas stopped drinking. The carpentry business recovered, steadied by his newfound sobriety. He was grateful in the way only a man who has been pulled from the deep water can be grateful. With his whole body, long after the water has dried, he owed his life to this sanctuary, and he would never forget the hand that reached down. Years passed, and gratitude hardened into an unyielding law. So when Pastor Emmanuel stood behind the elegant pulpit and announced that the church needed a magnificent new building, a proper house of God with a grand hall, administrative offices, and an iron gate, Brother Silas had it as a personal divine summons. He was a master carpenter. He knew concrete, iron rods, and foundations. He calculated it quietly over several nights. His family lived in a rented flat, and they had meager savings. He had a piece of land in the village he had not yet broken ground on. He concluded he could do it. He would give what he had, and ultimately, he gave more than what he had. For 3 agonizing years, he supervised the church building the way a man tends a sick child, with complete attention and no remainder left over. He sourced materials at a discount through hard-earned connections, worked grueling Saturdays, and turned down lucrative private contracts that conflicted with the sanctuary's schedule. When the heavy rains came and destroyed a freshly built section of the roof, Silas did not ask the church board for a dime. He dug deep into his own pockets, repaired it privately, and told no one. He believed he was laying up treasures in heaven, block by block, nail by nail. But while the house of God grew grander, Silas's own house was quietly starving. His savings were completely dried up. To keep the family afloat, to buy food, and to pay the landlord what little they could, Ada had to shoulder the entire financial burden alone. Every morning before dawn, she sat under the harsh sun at the local market, selling small piles of tomatoes, peppers, and onions from a wooden crate. Her hands grew callous from petty trading. Her small profits immediately swallowed up by the family's daily survival. She was funding the home so her husband could fund a cathedral. The lack crept into everything. On the wooden table at home lay the children's school uniforms, plain green, faded and threadbare, alongside shoes worn straight through at the soles. Ada stood over them in her colorful dress, her heart breaking as she looked at the visual proof of their decay. When she confronted Silas, pointing to the tattered clothes and the school fee notices, he stood nearby in his dusty carpenter's uniform, completely unconcerned. Finally, the grand church was completed. The dedication ceremony was beautiful, adorned with bright canopies, rows of plastic chairs, and flash photography. Pastor Emmanuel gave a magnificent speech from the finished stage. He praised the wealthy politicians who visited, thanked the members who organized, and called out major financial donors by name. He mentioned Brother Silas last, briefly, the way an artisan mentions a hammer after the cabinet is built, with a polite nod, but no real weight. Silas stood at the edge, a worn-out footnote to his own life's work. "14 months later, Silas was gone. A short illness, as people like to say when they want to avoid the truth, meaning it was a long, brutal collapse of a body worked to the bone and starved of rest. He died in that same rented flat they had occupied for 8 years. The land in the village remained an overgrown patch of weeds. He had never broken ground on it. There were no savings left. Just a wooden bed, a ceiling fan that made a mechanical sound like an unanswered question, and a wife who had stayed when she should never have been forced to suffer such a loss. Barely 3 weeks after the funeral, the church delivered its final verdict. A staff member was sent to the apartment doorstep. The church had assisted with rent during his final months. She explained politely, but the expense could no longer be managed by the ministry. Ada was given 3 weeks to pack and vacate. The pastor didn't even come himself. He sent the message through an intermediary, proving that the family's sacrifice was not even worth his own breath. The sanctuary Silas built had plenty of rooms, but not one for his grieving widow and children. Ada packed what little they owned into cardboard boxes and old sacks. With her children beside her, she boarded a commercial vehicle heading out of the noisy city, leaving behind the flats, the broken dreams, and the towering church gates. As the car rattled along, she watched the city skyline dissolve into a dusty horizon. The setting sun cast a deep golden glow across her face. There was pain, yes, but underneath it, a profound, unshakable clarity was taking root. They arrived at the village, stepping onto the very plot of land Silas had bought but never built upon. Standing amidst the unfulfilled foundations and wild grass with her son and daughter, Ada looked up at the open sky. She did not stop believing in God. Her faith was not broken, but she finally completely understood the difference between the two. Between God, who had never once asked her husband to impoverish his own family, and the man at the pulpit who did. She was finally home, free from the deception of men. Is there a difference between serving God and serving a man's vision? At what point does giving become neglecting those you love most? Be loyal to your faith, but never sacrifice your wisdom. God demands your righteousness and the care of your family, not the blind enrichment of men who hide behind the pulpit. True devotion builds up the home before it lays a single brick for the cathedral. Never let your loyalty to a building blind you to the sanctuary of your own family.
When the drum speaks, Africa remembers. When stories rise, hearts awaken. Afro tales.